Well, welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 431, which we will be talking about Azure Platform as a Service. And on Teams with me today on the 30th of June of 2022 is our very special guest, Nir Mashkowski, who has been on the show a while ago, and we are thrilled to have him back, and as well as Evan and myself, Cynthia. While we've been trying to get a couple episodes in so we can take a little summer break, we don't have any more updates for you today, so we'll dive straight into our topic. Nir, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Microsoft?
Sure. So thanks for having me. My name is Nir. I'm right now the product manager for the Azure PaaS services. So App Service, Azure Functions, Azure Container App, and Static Web Apps. This is my second iteration in this role. I used to work on this product since the inception. I was the first product manager on what was back then Azure websites, and did that for 8 years, left a little bit, and spent some time in AWS, and recently came back to Microsoft to sort of work on the same role.
Thrilled to have you back on the show and back here at Microsoft.
Good to be back. Yeah. Thank you.
Now that you said you were there at the inception, how has app services evolved throughout all these years?
I think just the scale is massive. I think it's fair to say that we're running a fleet that numbers in the millions of VMs and a similar number of customers and websites and APIs. And another very exciting thing for us in App Services that there's a lot of first-party products in Azure, in Microsoft, that are actually using App Services as its underpinnings and backends. I won't name any names because I didn't ask them, but a lot of the stuff you interact with in the larger Microsoft ecosystem, not just Azure, also Office 365 or gaming is actually powered by App Service, and we're very proud to be able to be part of that.
We should probably step back just a little bit, right? Because the sort of the focus for the episode was to talk about Azure PaaS and where it's going, and you listed a bunch of services when you were talking about what you're doing here at Microsoft now. We should probably define what PaaS or Platform as a Service is in the sort of the hierarchy of software as a service versus PaaS versus infrastructure as a service. How do you define those? Can you sort of define those three and put it in context for us?
Oh, for sure. So I think there's sort of the academic way and the pithy way. So the academic way is something Gartner came up with, where they talk about control versus productivity. So on your left side, you have control. That's your infrastructure as a service, your data center, your VMs, and so on. And then as you kind of move to the right, you have less control but more productivity. So then you would have things like Kubernetes and AKS in the Azure case. And then you get to the category of platform as a service, which is things like App Service, where all you do is kind of upload code and we do the rest for you. The next two levels are what is called serverless, again, very amorphic category, but it's really about functions as a service, where for us to be able to scale your code to zero and only pay for what you use, you have to write your code in functions that are stateless. All these categories now kind of merge into each other, and it's hard to discern between them. And obviously on the right side, you have software as a service, where you have no notion of the infrastructure and you interact with a business application. Some of those actually have pieces that are kind of developer focused. So if you use things like Salesforce or Power Apps, for example, you have these pieces where you can build applications in a visual way. So again, that's software as a service, and there's also the yet another new buzzword to understand, which is no code and low code.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the academic way. The PC way is to say, and I used to use that in presentations, is let's say you have to go from one point A to point B. You can buy a car, you can pay insurance, you can take it to the shop. That's kind of like IaaS. That's like having your own servers. Let's say you kind of went on vacation and you rented a car. That's like platform as a service, right? You have the car, you don't have to maintain it, but you still pay for the time you have it, and it's still not going anywhere when you're putting it in the parking lot. And then you have Uber, which is serverless, right? You only use it when you need to use it. And it takes you from place to place. So I think that's kind of the analogy I used to use, because it's really about Uberization of compute, if you will.
Yeah, no, I actually I was thinking like the driver version, but the Uber one it actually is better because everybody sort of grasps Uber. Not many of us get to have drivers, show up at our door and drive us around without paying them directly. But I think the other piece in that, right, is when you talk about the infrastructure as a service stuff, and this is true for your your automobile, right? Like you're paying a lot of money for that full flexibility, sort of that full privilege, and then when you go on the other side, you're paying less, but you're giving up that control by getting by taking some cost out, right? You're sort of trading control for cost at the end of the day as you go across that spectrum, right?
Cost and productivity and the time it takes you to achieve the task, right? We can take the delicious analogy some more, because with the Uber you can control the speed of the car it's going.
yeah. So as you were mentioning, this world has shifted a lot in recent years with AKS and and container instances coming along, but is if I'm somebody walking up today, I have nothing. Like I have no code, I have nothing. Maybe maybe I'm a Java person, or I'm a .NET, or whatever. How do I, like, what is the thinking process here? Do I start with what language? Do I pick a PaaS platform first? How do you recommend somebody approach that conversation to start with?
So I think that there's several aspects that I see customers thinking about, right? So one thing that is very very big these days, and rightly so, is customers want to have control over what they're running and where they're running it. So the meaning of that is customers, you would probably come in and say, everything has to be open sourced. I have to be able to see what components I'm running. I have to have great telemetry, and I have to be able to run it anywhere I want to run it, on Azure, on AWS, on my own data center, or under my desk for that matter. So that's kind of one aspect that is definitely, I personally think it's a great stage to be in, but it's definitely not what we've seen 10 years ago.
It's not typical, right? Because you're starting from scratch in that scenario. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to make sure that I build on a stack that I kind of understand and is open. And then based on that, I will look for productivity based on my sort of goals, right? So the next question I will ask you would be, what are you building, right? Today, you will probably be building a microservice-based application, which is a fancy name to say I'll have different components that are each encapsulated within a container. And at that point, you can think through the performance aspect of your applications, like how much traffic are you expecting? What is the type of computer you're going to do? Are you running, machine learning models? You're going to need a lot of memory. Are you going to do a lot of database I/O? So then mostly your CPUs are going to sit idle. There's all these kind of considerations you should make. But in the end of the day, I would say that most customers, again, personal opinion here, would err on the side of productivity versus the control.
Yeah.
So typically what I would say to customers, especially folks who are Microsoft customers and are working with us is, think about what you want to build. Can you build it with Power Apps? Great. If not, can you build it with Azure Functions? Also great. If not, can you build it with one of our container solutions, Azure Container App Service? Awesome as well. The next stage would be, okay, I need more control over how I scale and all these intricacies, or I'm bringing some open source set of components that I want to use, then I'll recommend AKS. And eventually, if you have very specific requirements, like you want to use some Hyper-V thing that only your company uses or what have you, I would go for a VM. So that's kind of the way I typically interrogate people that want to start from scratch, because it's never from scratch, right?
And then kind of similar along those lines, what if I decided to start with app service, for example, and then at one point I decided I needed more control? What is the usual process of, say, going down to a lower stack?
So that's a fair question. I think, I'll say, I don't know how it's going to come out, but most people don't do that. So after running app service literally for 10 years, we had a 10-year anniversary 2 weeks ago on June 8th.
That's awesome.
10 years since our initial release, so working with it for 12 years before. Most customers are not saying, hey, I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. What they're saying is, gee, we really want memory dump. So, gee, we really want to have larger VMs. And what we do as a team is we just go and build it for them. So in a lot of cases, what we essentially see, we see people kind of pushing against the envelope of control, of productivity, and asking for more control. And we try to essentially negotiate it with them to an extent. Having said all of that, all of our services, including Azure Functions, by the way, are based on open source components or widely known components. So if you look at an app service thing and you have an ASP.NET website or what have you, you have the code, you own the code, and you can go run it on any environment that you want. With our Linux offering that are container-based under the hood and also allow you to bring your own container, you can take your container and put it anywhere else. In fact, I have this slide I go around with, and I look at our services, and all of them support containers as a deployment unit. App Service, Azure Functions, even Azure Logic Apps now is available on top of Azure Functions in a container. So we're giving customers the flexibility to go run them anywhere. And in fact, we do have customers that run functions on-prem or on Kubernetes for specific use cases that, due to compliance or data sovereignty, they cannot do somewhere else. So I guess I didn't answer the question, but
I sort of laugh about the control question because I was actually thinking the same thing. And I was thinking what customers really want is to not pay anymore and get some piece of that control that they had back in the old world. When you were just talking about sort of the containerized aspects of this and the portability, as well as when you were talking about how somebody sort of makes a decision on where, what the platform is, I noticed that you used a couple of examples, but I noticed none of that in there was, are you a Go customer? Are you a .NET customer? Are you a Java customer? Are you a whatever? It is, at the end of the day, and I think it comes from the container piece, but I think it predated containers as well. It's really, you do whatever language you want, right? The platforms you're talking about, it's generally you use whatever language you want, and that's really just an implementation detail. You don't have to pick a language to go use one of these.
Correct. I think that's one of the kind of pieces where it's one of these tip of the icebergs thing that you can go to app service and deploy a Java application or a Node or a Python or obviously a .NET, and it just works. Behind the scene, there's a huge team that makes sure all of the latest releases of these stacks are actually on the machines, and that they're updated on time, and all the security patches are applied. So that's an enormous amount of work that we do for our customers, so they don't have to worry about it. And that's part of my personal and everyone's excitement with containers, is it made this problem a bit simpler to solve.
Yeah.
Because you can bring your stack together with your code, and not having to worry about the compatibility of your bits from your machine to whatever is in the cloud.
Yeah. Because I know not that there are always problems with software, right? Be it cloud or on premises, but like I know over the years I've seen this, we have absolutely had, problems in the past where somebody's using some really old, version of some library or whatever, and for whatever reason we didn't realize it, we didn't see it in our telemetry, we remove it for some security vulnerability, whatever, and it breaks them. And that's not the goal, right? The goal is that our platform should never break you under the cover. So the containers sort of insulates that problem, right? It's now built with their code. That's awesome. Okay, so great. So yeah, so at the end of the day, I have tons of flexibility what I use in these various platforms.
Sure.
From a platform perspective of us providing these services, how do we provide something like scaled to zero? Like internally, how do we kind of mix and match and Tetris all the different resources our customers are using?
So some of this is magic that we're not allowed to share, but the scale to zero is a super interesting problem, because what it means that we have an infrastructure that we maintain in a sort of warm state for you. You don't pay for it while you're not using it, but we still have some work that is needed to be done in order to maintain it. So what we try to do is to essentially share it between many customers. But to share it between many customers, we need to make sure that each customer gets a pristine, safe, and secure environment. So all of this put together means that the cost to us as a cloud provider, and I'm talking about all of them, to provide scale to zero is slightly higher, because we have to maintain all these things behind the scenes. We have to clean up the infrastructure. We need to schedule the different customers. So typically what you see that these scale to zero solutions like Azure Functions or ACI or Azure Container Apps, or for that matter, AWS Lambda, they all cost a little bit more if you try to use them all the time. So if you take the price of 1 second of Azure Functions and you multiply it by whatever, 60, 24, and so on, it's going to be much more expensive than a VM. But if you only need to run it for 5 minutes a month, you're going to save a lot of money. So what we're seeing that customers actually want to have some of that flexibility to sort of manage their costs, and that there's a certain point where the scale to zero is just not financially feasible. It actually costs more to have a scale to zero solution than to use your own infrastructure. And unlike some other providers, we actually give customers that flexibility by saying, hey, If you need to use a lot of functions, then you can have a dedicated plan where you kind of rent the CPU full time. We still do all the management, all the scaling for you. So that's kind of beyond the, I think, the nice answer without getting into proprietary technology solution. What's exciting is that the technology is improving. So in the beginning, like circa 2014, 2016, when functions as a service came out, the reason we asked people to write these functions was because we needed to really constrain them, if you will, in order to provide the scale to zero and the scale out and so on. And as technology improves now with things like Kubernetes and ACI and AKS and so on, and Azure Container Apps that we recently GA'd, we're able to provide this scale to zero container experience, where your container will be deprovisioned once it times out, if you will. In Azure Container App, we have the sort of next generation of that, which is idle pricing, where we say there is a situation where your container is not quite, it's like in The Princess Bride, it's mostly dead, it's not completely dead. And if you pay a fraction of the price of it running, we will keep it for you in a warmer state than completely off the disk and needs to be reprovisioned.
I love the point that you made about if you were to run a serverless app, 24/7, 365, it actually would end up being more expensive than, I don't know whether it's more expensive than functions or IaaS servers, but it's definitely more expensive than if you went to something more more permanent. That's such a sort of a meta point that I do see customers miss sometimes, which is, yes, on paper, if I just take exactly what I had on premises and move it to Azure, even if I'm just picking up my container and move it, if I do nothing around auto scale or serverless or deprovisioning when I don't need it, if I don't leverage all that stuff, I probably am going to pay more money at the end of the day. And so it sounds like what you're really pointing out is that just because I go PaaS, there's all this other stuff I have to take advantage of as well, such as, the scaling. I sort of want to pick the right variant of even a specific PaaS service, because if I don't, I'm actually probably hurting myself, from a cost perspective.
Yeah, I think there's the visible costs and the sort of invisible costs, right? So there is the labor cost of maintaining infrastructure that the cloud provider will do for you. But the way I like to talk about it is take, for example, app service, right? So imagine you wanted to build a scalable website by yourself. Okay, fine. You need to have at least 3 instances for failure, right? You need a load balancer. The load balancer should ideally be other boxes, right? You need storage. The storage needs to be persistent. You probably need telemetry because, hey, and you need a place to deploy.
Telemetry, hey, right? I love that.
Yeah. You want to fix your bugs. I'm sorry. English is not my.
No. It's not about the language. I just love this, sort of, you probably want some telemetry because I have worked with a lot of people. There's like, oh, you mean I should look at the data that I generate? Like they just sort of miss that whole piece.
So all of these pieces, if you were to run them by yourself, then every minute of compute that you're actually serving your customers probably has 4 or 5x
in front of it
ancillary infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And when you use these platforms as a services, we do it for you, right? So every scale unit for app service has a dedicated front end that you don't pay for. We take a lot of pains to map Azure storage into mounted disks, so you can have persistent storage and run like your WordPresses or some legacy stuff that is not stateless, right?
Yeah.
We have integration with App Insights. We take the pains to install the right agents.
It's just a button, right? You just sort of click a button and it gets turned on for it. Yeah.
And there's even telemetry that is sort of for free without App Insights that you can have. And then we also make sure that you have the ability to deploy. You can use our Kudu technology that's been around since a long time, but we actually provide a build server together with the hosting. So all of this stuff is things you would have had to pay for otherwise. So it does get to be a nuanced conversation because customers are used to doing this thing. They don't necessarily see these residual costs, but in the end of the day, it's costing you less money and less time. The other piece that I think is important, especially these days, is security, right? So when I think one was it 2018 when there was this side channel attack on Intel processors,
the meltdown Spectre stuff.
So the big cloud providers knew about it about 4 months before it became public. We got an opportunity to patch all of the machines before the industry knew about it. If you run your own data center, you're always at risk with security and vulnerabilities, and you don't have 200 people or even more that just do security for a living that the cloud provider can give you. So I think that's another kind of a hidden cost of risk mitigation for large enterprises that people want to think about when they move to the cloud. And yes, there is this perception that cloud is expensive, but then you have to kind of say, okay, but
Yeah, and I think your statement about 200 people doing security, I don't remember the exact numbers. I think I saw somewhere that Microsoft, and I'm sure AWS and Google and Alibaba are similar, but are spending billions of dollars on security investments and thousands and thousands of people that are focused on that. And any one enterprise is never going to be able to sort of invest that level, right?
Yeah, and it's not just software security; it's also physical security in our data center. Nobody knows where they are. There's very limited set of people that are allowed to go in there.
I have never been to one.
Cages and so on.
14 years of doing Azure, I have never gotten to go to one. So,
yeah, I think they keep one for big customers. That's not really a live data center, and all the rest of them are sealed.
Yeah.
We only see those racks in like our technology centers.
Videos.
This is what they look like.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a good thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, you don't want me near a server. I'm liable to grab a cable by accident or something.
Nir, curious if you could share with us what's the future direction we're going with our PaaS services, given that now we have so many different options, and there's some overlap in what each of them can do, but obviously they have areas where they're the best for. And how do you see this progressing as we go into the next 10 years?
So I think that the 10-year is a good way to start, right? So 10 years ago, when we started doing Azure websites, which became App Service, was we were trying to solve the problem of, hey, I have a bunch of Windows servers running websites, and I need to optimize that. Since then, a few things happened in the industry, and I'll just pick and choose some of them. One is that, if you haven't been living under the rock, we have this Kubernetes thing come out. So this differentiated technology of being able to do a control plane and a scalable infrastructure is now democratized through Kubernetes. So customers, and again, rightly so, are demanding that we will provide them solutions that are built on these open source stacks. So that's kind of a one big change. So if 10 years ago we were trying to solve how to manage a proprietary platform in order to save people time and money, today we have to do the same thing because our customer promise essentially hasn't changed. We want to make it easier and would I say more fun to build these applications. But now customers are demanding to have them on these open source platforms where they understand all the pieces. The other fundamental that has changed or added is we just have new application patterns. Right? So if again 10 years ago we had websites, we had APIs, we had batch jobs and what have you. Today we have microservices, we have Jamstack web applications where essentially a serverless web application where you have the content is on the CDN somewhere and the code runs in a combination of the browser and serverless function backends. So we also want to support our customers with these new patterns. So if you look at kind of how we're progressing and the things we're doing, that's the direction we're going. We're trying to make sure that we understand what our customer needs and are and kind of lead in that direction. So today, given those base premises, which is hey, I want to run with open source stacks, .NET Core, Java, Python, what have you. I want to make sure that I'm on a Kubernetes-based infrastructure, and I want to understand how you do your magic of scaling and so on. If you see what we've been developing with Azure Container Apps and our open source components like Kada, that is a scaler for Kubernetes, and Dapper, which is a way to make sure these microservices can communicate with each other and work with other systems. And we're trying to get to this paradigm where we will still provide you these PaaS value props, scale to zero, maintenance, build environments, and updated stacks and security, but we provide it on a more transparent platform. So again, what we're seeing, and it's resonating very well with customers, is they can use Azure Container Apps, it scales to zero, but it still has all of these open source components that are driving it. And you'll see us investing more and more in kind of that direction. To answer the question of what should I use when, which is always sort of the tough question, is if you take a look, there's this CNCF website where they show you all the components that are available for Kubernetes, right? So it's a huge buffet of options. Some of them work well with each other, some don't. What we offer is we say, okay, we kind of tailored and picked and chose the right components that work really well together, and we're going to give you that as an opinionated PaaS platform. So I think that for us, it's about building a platform that customers, modern apps or cloud native or whatever you want to use, and retaining this experience that makes our existing customers so happy. That's kind of in a nutshell the long answer to the short question.
No, this is great, and this is a lot for our listeners and our users to think about too, of which direction they're going with their application and how Azure's involvement kind of grows with that.
I actually thought the piece that really resonated with me, Nir, that you said is we have an opinionated sort of selection, but we're still contributing back to the open source world. So you don't, just because you don't use our stuff doesn't mean you're not getting the benefit of what we're doing. And we're trying to create this sort of curated experience, but it's not a closed thing at the end of the day, right? We are still working within this broader framework. And I think that's really what it's about in terms of driving the industry and helping our customers get forward, sort of just providing that best experience across the board. That's a great philosophy. It's thrilling to hear that you guys have that approach.
Yeah, and I think that is a great way to end this episode.
Sounds good. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
Thank you.